Welcome to Chris Parking Shooting Sports. I've got a very unusual video to make today. Sportsman Gun Centre have asked me to do a target shooting scope roundup, and they have sent me a lot of target shooting scopes. So the question is, if you want a target shooting scope, which is a very broad term, what exactly do you need? And that differs a little bit from what exactly do you want, because you need to start thinking about some serious questions. Now, I've written myself a list to talk through here because this is basically going to be a video of me talking and showing you some examples, and we're going to discuss the factors you need to consider for what you do need for your target shooting scope. The first thing people think is that high magnification is what a target shooting scope is. To some extent, that may well be true, because for target shooting you are, generally speaking, in a more static position. You can use more magnification, get more aiming precision, and see your bullet holes perhaps more easily. But on the contrary to that, some target shooting sports are a lot more dynamic. You've got a lot more fire and movement. You might want a much smaller scope, much lower magnification to be able to pick up your target instantly and then be able to take precision shots. Many of these factors tie in with each other, because another thing to consider is the actual size of the target. Now, going back to that previous example where we're talking about fire and movement, you might be shooting figure 11 size targets, which is sort of human torso size and shape, and you don't need a huge amount of magnification to get a good aiming solution on that for a fast shot move on to the next one. But if you were, example, shooting that same figure 11 target from 1500 meters away, you would want a high magnification scope with lots of adjustability, because that's the shot you're going to be making there. So this hopefully is leading you to start thinking about what exactly do I need to do what I want to do. Then we talk about target distance. Now, target shooting could be a 1 to 6 times scope, it could be a red dot scope. You know, target shooting could be pistols in some countries, or short action rifles, lever action rifles. That's all target shooting. May well be indoors at 25 meters perhaps on a pistol range. So you might want like a little 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 by 24, and those would be ideal for that. And that of course translates over into the other world, like driven sport shooting. So that will be target shooting in that kind of environment at that distance. What happens if you're moving out to 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 meters? Well, I've left that scope pretty much there because that's the sort of scope you're looking at for that. But again, what is the target size at that distance? Because it's not going to be tiny. It's probably going to be at least a meter square at 1,000 meters plus, because most people want to be able to actually see their impacts are actually doing something and that they're not just missing and going nowhere. And once you've seen that impact, where the bullet is going, well, what's your next choice then? Do you want to dial a correction? Do you want to aim off a correction? Do you want to fire again quickly? Or have you got time for the target to move up and move down? You've got spotters, markers going in. Those are all other factors that you might be thinking about, because if you're an F-class shooter, you've got time for that target to go down, spotters will put the spotter in, target will come back up. You've got several minutes between shots sometimes. If you're shooting at long distance in the field and shooting on steel plates, you need to get that second bullet in the air as fast as you can to hopefully try and repeat and match on the previous win condition you may have either won or lost by on the previous shot 2 seconds previously. So speed is key. That all comes back into the Eyebox, eye relief things, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, of course, target distance, people think long range. Do they need a big tube size, 34mm tube as opposed to 30mm tube? How much physical, mechanical elevation travel have you got on your scope to dial that distance? Have you got enough to go from the shortest distance you need to the longest distance you need without changing anything on your mounts? Have you got enough inherent dialing capability on the scope to do that full range of movement in one sitting without having to do any mechanical changes externally? Now, of course, extreme serious long range target shooters use adjustable mounts and all sorts of things, but I think we're going to stop this just talking about what we can do with one scope on the rifle without any external mechanical changes. So the more expensive you go doesn't necessarily mean it's got more travel. So these are things really you need to look in the technical specifications of the rifle scope for, because technical details don't really lie. They're not really subject to marketing, and they can be easily proven correct or incorrect. So marketing and advertising has to be honest about them, because if you to prove that the scope doesn't have as much travel as it says it does, well, it's not fit for purpose. That's not what it was advertised to do. So you would then get a refund on it. And this is why specifications on a technical basis can be trusted. That's totally different to far more subjective opinion on things like light coloration, image coloration, eyebox versatility and things like that. But when it comes to mechanical travel and the actual features and specifications a rifle scope has, those can be trusted on the specification sheet. Another key part to think about when you're talking about target distance is parallax adjustability. Now, a lot of scopes, and I would generally say if you're going to shoot target, you are going to definitely need a scope with parallax adjustability. And parallax adjustability is very dependent on what rifle you're going to be shooting. So if you're shooting a centerfire rifle between say 200 and 1500 meters, parallax adjustability will be fine because you've probably got minimum 100 meters and it will go all the way out to infinity. If your target shooting discipline involves air rifles, for example, maybe going from as close as 5 meters out to say 50 meters, you will definitely need parallax control that will allow you to get clean focus and a parallax free aiming solution at those very short distances. And it has to do that at the highest magnification as well, because a lot of scopes, especially those scopes that don't have parallax control, people confuse using too much magnification or too little magnification and focus and things like that, because they don't really understand the differences between which focal controls do what on a rifle scope. And maybe that's one for a different video some other time. Now, looking back at the first or second focal plane question mark, I think personally I've got used to using first focal plane and I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't go to second focal plane. I just prefer first focal plane. There is no right and there is no wrong answer. The big difference is a first focal plane reticle in a rifle scope will stay absolutely in correct proportion with the image as you zoom up. So as you zoom in, the image gets bigger, the reticle gets bigger, but the actual correlation between the aim offs, the mil radian or minute of angle hash marks stays the same, and they always stay in complete correlation with what's on the turrets as well. On a second focal plane rifle scope, the rifle scope reticle will stay exactly the same size regardless of the magnification you're using, and the image will get larger or smaller. So that means if you've got hash marks and things like that on a reticle like that, they will only work at specific magnification values which you need to very, very carefully set up and maintain if you want to have correct correlation between the reticle's correct measured distance, subtension on target, and how much you click your turret by. You can't just translate one to the other unless you're using your no magnification setting. Then again, on the other hand, for hunting purposes, the reticle in the second focal plane is actually generally maybe sometimes preferable because it stays a fixed size, it's not an issue, and you can choose the exact size of reticle you want in all scenarios, and it's only the image that changes size. That's where the two will differ. Now, we've spoken about minutes of angle or mils. Do you want your target scope to work in minutes of angle or milliradians? That's very much down to personal choice. Again, I'm a milliradians kind of guy these days. I used to work in minutes of angle. I work in milliradians now, but you can work in either. It's up to you, suits what you want, and generally most premium scopes, for example the Elements or the Nightforce, they will give you the identical scopes with minutes of angle or milliradians options, minutes of angle turrets, milliradian turrets, and everything will correlate. This isn't like 20 years ago where you'd have minutes of angle adjustment with a mil-dot scope. The modern world has come in now, so we have true correlation between the different measurement systems you want to use. So that really is down to your personal choice. Neither is better than the other. They are just different. So now the question arises, do you want large exposed turrets that are immediate to grab hold of? You can hear and count those clicks, you can see them, you've got things like zero stops, so you can immediately go back down to your 0 point with no issue running below or anything like that. Most target shooting disciplines now will want to use some kind of fast adjustable turret, both for windage and elevation, because a lot of the target shooting disciplines involve fast changes between different ranges. So things like PRS, you need to change between a 50 meter target and a 138 meter target and a 275 meter target and a 512 meter target at the flick of a wrist as quickly as that. It's no good taking caps off, dialing things up and down. You don't want to be doing that. And again, in a PRS style format, that's why you want a matching reticle with your turrets and first focal plane, because you haven't always got time to dial corrections or adjustments to different distances. If you have a course of fire where you've got 10 targets and you've got 4 different distances within that, you need to be able to aim off to make the shots correct for the point of impact you need. You haven't got time to dial. Contrary to that, if you're shooting F-class, for example, you've no great speed required at all, because it can be several minutes between shots and you don't need to make those fast adjustments. And the difference between changing distances can be hours apart, because you'll shoot long course of fire at one distance, then the next distance, then the next distance. You won't be constantly chopping and changing around. So that is where the modern turrets are great for PRS. Things like that, multiple distances, gives you great flexibility and speed. If you are competing in a target shooting discipline, things like the physical weight of a scope matter. Can you go to an 1100 gram scope, or do you need to cap it off at 600 or 800 grams? You know, your rifle and scope combination will have a specific weight limit on it, and you might need to trim the weight elsewhere to make sure you can have that heavy barrel, or you can have that adjustable stock you want. You might need to lose some weight off your scope or your mount. Those are factors, again, that you can see in the actual specifications of the rifle scope, and they will tell you the exact weight of it, so you can factor that in on your whole competition rifle build. Similarly, the size is a factor. Now, this is less so on some target shooting disciplines. Something like F-class, it doesn't really matter as long as the weight's okay, because the rifle is big and bulky, the barrel is long, the scope is not going to make any difference in terms of its physical size. If you're, for example, at the other end and shooting AR-15 with fire and movement, you want a much smaller, more compact scope. As well as the weight, you don't want the scope to be catching on your clothing, on obstacles, barricades, things like that. So that's another factor. Choose what you need for the type of shooting you are going to do. And don't just think bigger is always better, because actually bigger can often be more of a hindrance than a help. Most of the modern target shooting scopes are built for a world where they expect rapid adjustment on a frequent basis. The internal mechanisms using different materials and modern machining are now designed for those rapid changes in mechanical setup. The warranties reflect this. They are designed to be durable like this, like the gearbox in a car. It's designed to shift gear hundreds of thousands of times before it wears out, and realistically a scope is now designed in a similar way. Hunting scopes with small capped dials are not really designed like that because of the weight, bulk and complexity of it, whereas these ones are, and that's one of the big differences between a target or a precision rifle scope and a hunting scope. It's important to consider other factors optically, like eye relief, because eye relief that's say 100mm for a Magnum rifle can actually be quite large and long on a smaller rimfire or air rifle. Whereas if you've got a large heavy caliber rifle, you need that eye relief to make sure you're not going to scope yourself and hit the bone above your eyeball here. But think of it another way. A lot of these very heavy rifles, even in large calibers, have got muzzle brakes, recoil reduction systems on them, and because the physical mass of the rifle also cuts that heavy recoil. So talking about Magnum eye relief, which maybe for, you know, a 375 sporting rifle, that does need Magnum eye relief because it's a light rifle, it's going to be very lively. On a target rifle, which is usually a lot bigger, heavier, bulkier, with less recoil, regardless of caliber, you don't maybe need that 100mm of eye relief, and a lot of serious precision optics are capped off at about 90mm, 3.5 inches of eye relief, because it does give certain optical benefits. And one of those benefits is what I call the eyebox, and the eyebox is essentially the place where you're sitting within the scope at the correct eye relief, but the eyebox represents how much that scope can move around and you can still maintain the full sight picture. Because especially at long distance, when you need to see your bullet in flight and the impact on the target, you want the rifle scope to remain clear in front of your eye to make sure you can see that trace from the bullet and then the splash as it impacts either the target or the background. Having super critical, super short eye box with no allowance for recoil to move within it means you'll probably get an instantaneous loss of sight picture, and that's where that slightly shorter eye relief can come in as a beneficial factor, and why you tend to see it on the largest, most premium rifle scopes like this Nightforce Attack R. Now, one thing we haven't talked about in serious detail is the reticle. Now, that reticle can be very important. Do you need an illuminated reticle, yes or no? I would always say yes, because you can turn it on, turn it off as you need it. But most importantly, those reticles need to match your turret corrections. Now that is a factor that we've discussed, but how busy do you want that reticle to be? Do you want every single 10th milliradian hash mark to be there fully in front of you with multiple different areas underneath that sort of Christmas tree setup that will give you 101 different ways of measuring a target? Do you want that or do you not want that? Because it looks like it's great, but especially shooting at longer distances, if you have got all those hash marks, well, they are somewhat confusing the reticle. It looks a little bit too busy, and you haven't got those free areas at the top and underneath the main quadrants of the reticle to see your bullet's impact. You know, it might kick up a puff of sand, you might see that trace go through the scope, and you want that clear space to make sure you can see for that kind of discipline. Now, if you're using your reticle for measurement, which is where a lot of these reticle designs come from, yes, that is very important. Let's not forget though that many of those reticle designs come from a military world where you've got a specific target type that's maybe 6 feet tall and he might be, you know, standing half a mile away from you. Those are designed for measuring that to great high precision. They're not actually brilliantly designed for spotting your bullet's impact on the target or on the background behind the target. So be careful about choosing a reticle that is too busy, as I call it. Go for the one that's got the markings on that you need and nothing more. And I would generally say, go for the one that you like with the factors and aim off markings for elevation and windage that you need. Don't go for the busiest one because you think it's better, because you'll probably find it can be detrimental. Now, I have in front of me an array of scopes here, which vary in price from £500 to £4,500 almost. If we discussed every single one in detail, this video would go on for hours. There are plenty of videos on my channel and on this channel to allow you to see the scopes fully reviewed in detail each. We've discussed overall factors about mechanical travel, range, weight, length, size, all those specifications to think about. Do you need a 56mm front end or will a 50mm front end objective do? Well, personally, I think if you're going to have more magnification, you're generally going to be in a bigger setup. You may as well go for the 56 if you can have it, because it's not really detrimental from anything else. And of course, all that light that's allowed to go into the tube helps going through all those extra mechanics, because a larger tube size between a 30 and a 34mm doesn't necessarily make the erector tube inside any larger. It just gives the erector tube inside a lot more ability to travel angularly within the outer tube, so do remember that too. But that large 56 versus a 50 or even smaller front end does allow more light to go into the scope and go in through that system. The light transmission of the scope is of course important. The more you pay, the better the quality of the glass will be most likely, and you will get a better light transmission factor. Certainly at the high end you want to be talking 90% plus of the light that comes in coming out of the back here. Other things you want to think about, fast focus on the eyepiece. Now that is what I would call a conventional fast focus eyepiece. Very easy to set up. Once it's set up, you can put whatever scope cap back on. It's never going to give you an issue again. If you went to this Nightforce, for example, this is very different because the scope cap comes off here and actually the whole ocular body rotates to change magnification, whereas here we're just using the collar there to change magnification. And that means if you want to add accessories like external cameras or things like that, a scope without a rotating ocular body is going to be beneficial, because you couldn't put something like that on something like the Nightforce where the camera is also going to be rotating with the magnification. But don't forget, the scope's designed for shooting with, not for filming with, so think of all these things ahead of time. There are lots of small factors to look at. The design of the turrets, how grippy they are, how easy the zero locks are to operate. You know, that one has a zero lock on it, so you have to press the button there to actually dial up from your 0 point, but it's got a nice zero stop. The Nightforce doesn't have a zero lock, but it does have a zero stop. Again, it's got nice firm clicks. You hear them click, you can feel them click too, and it's not something you're generally accidentally going to be knocking and nudging around, because it's not the kind of scope that's most likely to be on a rifle getting dragged around. It's going to be in some form of case. But do think about these factors. We're not military snipers, we are target shooters. So although it's nice to think they're going to get dragged around in a drag bag or something like that, or pulled through foliage, generally speaking, possibly not. So be honest with yourself as to what your expectation requirements are. Most scopes are made of aluminium, they're all very well machined, you've got hard anodised black finish on the outside. They all look quite similar, but the details and technicalities can be critical. So things like minimum parallax distance, how much of the reticle lights up if it is illuminated, is it a small cross in the centre, is it the whole reticle? These are factors you want to consider. Most manufacturers will post a good reticle picture that you can actually assess and analyse to see if it's going to be what suits your needs and requirements. Where the scope is made can be a big factor about how much the scope costs and how it's judged the opinion of it. The lower end scopes are often made in the Far East, in China, and then you move through the mid-range where you move to places like Japan or the USA where manufacture takes place or assembly takes place, and these are scopes that are higher in the premium market. You move up to things like the Element Theos, the Nightforce, they're all made in Japan and it's beautifully precision made kit. Optical manufacture in China has made a lot of capability available to shooters at a far lower cost, and the actual performance is very good. But when you use these things a lot of the time and you get used to them, you do see the differences when you move up to, say, Japanese optics and Japanese manufacturing. They will tend to have more specific design factors and nuances appropriate to the market they're designed for. Right, I'm just going to move these two rifles out of the way now and just show you a few of these other scopes that are sitting in front of you. Now this is the most expensive one I've got on the bench today. This is the Nightforce Attack R7035 by 56. 7 to 35 means it goes from 7 to 35 times magnification, and 56 means it's a 56mm front objective lens to let the light in. Pop that one on the floor. That scope's over £4,000, so it's clearly at the very premium end of the market. But if we compare that with something absolutely opposite end of the market, I would actually say this is a bit of a crossover scope between a hunting scope and a target scope. It's got a lot of target shooting capability with it for medium-sized targets at medium distances, and of course it's a lot smaller, a lot more compact. This is an Element Optics Helix HDLR 2 to 16 by 50, and the price on this is £464. It's still got zero adjustable turrets, you've got nice clicks, external adjustment, you've got close range parallax and illumination with a reticle as well that matches those clicks, but it is a second focal plane reticle, so it only matches those clicks when it's set at a specific magnification value. If we were to go up in the Element Optics range, we could look at this 3 to 18 Helix. Now that's a 3 to 18, so it goes 3 to 18. That's a 6 times magnification ratio, whereas this one here is a 2 to 16. Well, that's actually an 8 times magnification ratio. Is that better? Well, it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different, and it gives you a greater capability for a hunting crossover scope, because at 2 times you've got that large field of view for more dynamic target shooting events perhaps, but at 16 power you've got more precision. Whereas if you move up to this one, this is a 34mm tube, you've got a lot more mechanical elevation travel within it, you've got much nicer turrets for doing that travel with, you've again got parallax, you've got illumination, very similar, but the 34mm tube I said gives more elevation travel, still on a 50mm front end, still on a 50mm front end. You look at those scopes side by side, the untrained eye wouldn't see a lot of difference between them, but there is a fundamental difference between them. And the price of this one, at 3 to 18, goes up to £624, and this one is having the reticle in the first focal plane. So you've got that advantage for target and multi-range shooting disciplines again. Now going back to Nightforce again, this is an NX8 Nightforce with a different magnification ratio, but it's different in terms of the setup as well. Let me just move that to one side. This is a 2.5 power scope that goes up to 20 times, so you've got a great magnification ratio on it. It's quite a compact build, you know, compare that against one of those there, and you can see the size difference. Now the other thing with this Nightforce is that when you change the magnification, it doesn't rotate the whole of the ocular body, and that has got certain advantages because you could use rear add-ons like cameras or night vision things if it was to be a crossover hunting scope. And it also means that that rear scope cap won't rotate as you're changing the magnification. This scope is at £2,200. It's still the beautiful Japanese made optic, but it's got a different specification entirely. Is it the scope for you? Well, that's for your choice to make, isn't it? And if we look now at this one, I can tell you just by looking through it, that is a first focal plane rifle scope. This is of course an ideal target scope if you've got more fire and movement, because down at 2.5 power you can pick up targets incredibly quickly, and then you can either dial up to make the shot, or you've got the precision in the reticle to actually aim off to make the shots as you need them, as well as a quick change dialing capability to change distances. But again, on the windage here, that's under a cap. It still changes and adjusts just as accurately. Do you need a windage cap or not? Is that something you're going to factor into your target shooting requirements? But that is certainly a small scope. And if you were to put that scope, say, on an AR-15, you've got a great low magnification scope, lots of field of view. You can make quick shots, fire and movement. And then if you do want that precision, just dial up for an accurate rifle to make shots and hits at longer ranges. Now again, looking back into the middle of range, you've got a primary arms PLX5 6-30. It's called a PLX5 because 5x6 is 30 and it's a 56mm front end. So you've got the Athena reticle, which is a mil reticle, and this is a first focal plane scope. It's about £1,100, so it represents the centre of the market. And just to show you what's in a scope like this, you get your scope, and it comes with things like a sunshade, and these accessories will all be listed when you actually look at the manufacturer's advertising statement for a rifle scope, and you can choose what you want and need. Again, we've got target shooting turrets here, we've got milli-radian clicks, nice 56mm objective lens, lets plenty of light into the scope, and we've got adjustable parallax, adjustable illumination, and that's a 34mm tube, so we've got excellent elevation travel within as well. Again, it's all in the specifications, and the magnification control here means you've not got a rotating ocular body, and things like the lens cap are also not going to move in use. Now, as we move towards the end of this review, we've got different scopes from Element Optics. We've got a Nexus Gen 2 and a Theos, and these are scopes that I've reviewed both of individually in the past, and you'll be able to see those reviews. I'll put links to them on this video. I'll put links to more of the scopes on the video that have been reviewed already. And again, you're moving up to Japanese manufacture from Chinese manufacture, so you're getting much nicer optical quality and that little bit of extra reassurance of one of the finest manufacturing cultures on earth. The Theos is quite different because it has an unusual grey colour. It's what I would call a sort of a shark colour about it. But then again, we're back. We've got adjustable turrets, we've got windage, we've got elevation adjustment, and there are different markers here for things like a second rotation indicator. So this little marker here, as you dial up, will show you whether you are still on the first or moving on to the second turn, how much entire travel you've put into the elevation of that system. Things like a throw lever are evident here. Some scopes have that, it's usually listed in the specifications, and that will just speed up the transit between low and high magnification again. That's particularly useful in things like PRS, where you need to get into position quickly, find your target quickly, and then equally fast, turn up your magnification to make those precision shots once you've found the correct target you need, because finding the targets can often be a factor that too much magnification inhibits. So being able to start with a low magnification and move up gives you a lot more capability on the competition course of fire. Now the Theos is £2,200, but Element make a fairly similar scope but in a 30mm tube. And this is the Nexus Gen 2. I'll put the review of this scope on as well because I've reviewed one of these entirely in the past. And doesn't it look very, very similar? We've even got the similar sort of second rotation indicator there. So when we go all the way around, that clicks into its second position. Can you see that on camera there as it moves from one to the next on the second rotation? The windage is capped under here. These are all things that you'll know to look for now. But here we're in a 30mm tube, a little bit less elevation travel, and it's a different specification because this scope goes up to 25 from 4 times. So it's a different magnification ratio to the Theos, which was a 6 power. Now it's useful if your rifle scope arrives with a reticle manual or a picture like this because it allows you to see all those hash marks and gives you a detailed description of what the aim off values are, what the subtension on target is. And of course with first focal plane being so much more popular now than it used to be, that's very easy to use in terms of your everyday target shooting. This one happens to be the minutes of angle version of the scope. I actually reviewed the milli-radians version of the scope in the past, but essentially it's just the unit which suits you as to your preference. Right, I hope this video has gone through a lot of factors in as brief a time as possible for you to think about when you are choosing your next rifle scope. Remember, it's not just about the big numbers, it's about thinking what those numbers mean and how those numbers translate to what you actually need from your rifle scope for the rifle shooting discipline you're thinking of doing. Right, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, click the notification bell to keep track of the regular uploads, and don't forget, pose all those questions and I'll answer them as best as I can over the next week. Right, thank you for watching. Bye for now.